The crunch of broken concrete under my boots still haunts me. I'm standing where my beautiful stamped driveway used to be, now just jagged chunks and bulldozer scars. The smell of diesel exhaust hanging in the morning air, orange construction cones mocking me from my own front yard. They didn't just steal my driveway, they sent me the bill for emergency road improvements. $15,000 of my money destroyed overnight. My 78-year-old wheelchair-bound father trapped in his apartment because his accessible ramp? Gone. Here's the kicker. Brenda Kowalski and her HOA goons thought they'd broken me. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording everything, every violation, every threat, every illegal move. This retired firefighter was about to become their worst nightmare. What would you do if vandals destroyed your property and demanded you pay for it? Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Because the trap I set for these criminals will blow your mind. My name's Marcus Dalton, and 8 years ago I thought I'd found paradise in Willowbrook Estates just outside Phoenix. I'm a retired firefighter who turned my passion for woodworking into a small business, and the house came with an extra-wide driveway, 18 feet instead of the standard 16, perfect for lumber deliveries. Every morning I'd sit on my front porch with coffee, listening to cardinals chirping in the mesquite trees, breathing in the scent of fresh mulch from my flower beds. Life was simple, peaceful, and about to get completely destroyed. 6 months ago, my 78-year-old father moved in after his stroke. Decorated Vietnam veteran who needed wheelchair access, so I converted the garage into an apartment with a custom wooden ramp I built myself. That's when I first encountered Brenda Kowalski, and let me tell you, this woman makes a root canal seem pleasant by comparison. Picture a 61-year-old insurance adjuster from Minnesota with a bleached blonde bob, permanently attached clipboard, and the emotional warmth of a tax audit. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, there she'd be in her khaki capris and white tennis shoes, stalking the neighborhood with a measuring tape like some kind of suburban serial killer. Brenda had appointed herself HOA president after the previous volunteer burned out, and she spoke in corporate buzzwords that could put an insomniac to sleep: community aesthetic standards, property value optimization, compliance protocols. She treated neighbors like insurance claimants, suspicious until proven innocent. My first taste of Brenda's special brand of crazy came last winter when I found a citation in my mailbox. Non-conforming driveway width violates community aesthetic standards. Apparently, my 18-foot driveway was an egregious violation of community harmony. And yes, she actually used the word egregious like it was a personal insult. I appealed with a surveyor's report proving my driveway was original construction, predating the HOA by 3 years. Brenda dismissed it faster than week-old fish, declaring that grandfathering doesn't apply to egregious violations. The harassment escalated weekly. Citations for trash cans visible from the street. They were behind a 6-foot fence. Unapproved bird feeder disturbing community aesthetics. Workshop deliveries during quiet hours. Apparently 2 p.m. on Tuesday is too noisy for Brenda's afternoon nap. Fines stacked up like a bad poker hand. $50, $75, $100 per violation, each one more ridiculous than the last. Then came the weekend that changed everything. Dad and I went camping up in Sedona for a few days, first time he'd been out of the house since his stroke. When we returned Sunday evening, I nearly drove past my own house because my driveway had vanished. Not damaged, completely gone. 18 feet of beautiful stamped concrete reduced to chunks and powder, orange emergency roadwork signs sprouting like toxic mushrooms overnight. A bulldozer sat in my front yard like some mechanical beast marking its territory, hydraulic fluid leaking into my flower beds. And there was Brenda, standing in my yard with her clipboard, yellow hard hat, and that smug smile that said she'd been planning this moment for months. "Emergency fire access requirements," she announced without a hint of apology. "Your driveway was blocking potential emergency vehicle turnaround space. We acted under our emergency powers clause." The sound of my boots crunching broken concrete mixed with the bulldozer's diesel engine idling, but what really got me was seeing Dad sit silent in the passenger seat, staring at where his wheelchair ramp used to be. That's when I realized this wasn't about driveways or fire access or community standards. This was about power, control, and one woman's twisted need to make everyone else as miserable as she was. But here's what Brenda didn't know about firefighters. We don't run from fires, we run toward them. And she had just lit the biggest fire of her pathetic little life. I marched straight to Brenda's house, rage burning hotter than a 5-alarm warehouse fire. Through her living room window, I could see her hosting what she called an emergency HOA board meeting. 3 other power-hungry retirees who'd moved in recently, all nodding like bobbleheads while she held court. The artificial vanilla air freshener couldn't mask the smell of fierce sweat and instant coffee when I rang the doorbell. "Marcus!" Brenda chirped, opening the door with theatrical surprise. "We were just discussing your situation." Behind her, the board members, Harold Finch, Margaret Webb, and David Chen, looked like deer caught in headlights. These weren't evil masterminds. They were lonely retirees who'd mistaken Brenda's confidence for competence. "My situation?" I stepped inside uninvited. "You mean the destruction of my private property?" Brenda gestured to a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Emergency Safety Ordinance 47B passed 3 days ago under our imminent threat clause. Your driveway posed a clear and present danger to emergency vehicle access." She handed me an official-looking document that probably took her all night to type up, complete with fancy letterhead and legal-sounding gibberish. But here's where Brenda made her first mistake. She got greedy. Along with the ordinance, she presented me with a bill for $4,200 covering emergency road construction and debris removal. $4,000 for destroying my own driveway, plus she threatened to file a lien if I didn't pay within 30 days. The sheer audacity was breathtaking, but it also triggered a memory from my firefighter training about emergency procedures and legal requirements. "Let me see the meeting minutes," I demanded. "Voting records, contractor permits, the works." Margaret Webb shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we conducted an emergency email vote without homeowner notification," I interrupted. Back in my fire department days, we dealt with plenty of HOA disputes, and I remembered the captain always saying that Arizona law requires 30-day notice for any assessment over $1,000. "That's a violation of state statutes, folks. You can't just email your way around the law," Brenda waved dismissively. "Emergency powers supersede standard procedures, Marcus. We're trying to protect the community." Then she pulled out her secret weapon, a manila envelope filled with photos she'd been taking of my property for months. My workshop, Dad's wheelchair ramp, visiting family cars parked in my own driveway, even shots through my kitchen window. The woman had been conducting surveillance like I was some kind of terrorist. "Wouldn't want your father's living situation to come under scrutiny for zoning violations," she said with a smile that could freeze hell. That's when I noticed something interesting in her paperwork. The contractor's invoice from Eagle Construction LLC. The name rang a bell, and not a pleasant one. I'd seen that name somewhere before but couldn't place it. What really caught my attention was the date stamp. The work order was placed a full week before her emergency ordinance was supposedly passed. This wasn't emergency response. This was premeditated destruction with a paper trail stupider than a screen door on a submarine. As I left Brenda's house of horrors, neighbors started emerging from their homes like prairie dogs after a thunderstorm. Some offered sympathetic looks, others quickly ducked back inside when they saw me coming. The neighborhood had split into factions overnight, those who supported me, those who wanted peace at any price, and Brenda's shrinking circle of true believers. The sound of hushed conversations across fence lines mixed with the sudden stopping of lawnmowers whenever I walked by, creating an atmosphere thicker than smoke in a burning building. That evening, Mrs. Patterson from next door slipped me a handwritten note. "She's done this before. Check the Hendersons situation from last year." The Hendersons. I remembered them vaguely. Nice family with twin daughters who'd moved away suddenly. I'd assumed it was job-related, but now I wondered if there was more to the story. A quick internet search revealed the disturbing truth. The Hendersons had quietly sold their house and moved across town with no forwarding address, no complaints filed with any agency, no social media posts about their relocation. They'd simply vanished from Willowbrook like they'd never existed. But property records told a different story. They'd sold for $30,000 below market value in what looked like a distressed sale. The pattern was becoming clear as a bell tower at midnight. Brenda didn't just want compliance. She wanted complete control. Identify targets who wouldn't bow down, manufacture violations, escalate pressure until they either submitted or fled. The Hendersons had chosen flight, abandoning their dream home rather than fight a system designed to crush them. But here's the thing about firefighters. We're trained to run toward danger when everyone else runs away, and Brenda Kowalski had just lit the biggest fire of her miserable little life. The next morning, I drove straight to the courthouse with a thermos of coffee and a growing suspicion that Brenda's operation ran deeper than petty HOA tyranny. The musty smell of old records and bureaucracy filled the air as I worked with the clerk at the business registration office. Within 20 minutes, I had my answer. Eagle Construction LLC was registered to one Donald Kowalski, Brenda's husband. The coffee suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth as the pieces clicked together like a perfectly engineered scam. I kicked myself for not checking online first. Most state business databases are public record and searchable from home. something I learned the hard way after wasting gas money on the courthouse trip. But seeing those documents in person, Donald's signature authorizing invoices while his wife approved the payments, made the fraud feel real and prosecutable. Over 18 months, Eagle Construction had received $180,000 in HOA contracts, all no bid, all approved by emergency vote, all for work that seemed suspiciously overpriced. My next stop was tracking down the Henderson family through social media detective work. When I called, Mrs. Henderson's voice went quiet the moment I mentioned Willowbrook Estates. "We can't talk about that," she whispered. "The settlement agreement." But before hanging up, she managed to squeeze out a warning that made my blood run cold. "She destroyed our pool. 8,000 in violations. Document everything. Trust no one on that board." The pattern was becoming clearer than a freshly washed windshield. Brenda would target families who seemed financially vulnerable or unwilling to fight, manufacture increasingly expensive violations, then offer salvation through her husband's construction company. Pay up or get out. A perfect little protection racket disguised as community improvement. But Brenda wasn't finished with me yet. When I got home, there were 12 new violation notices stuffed in my mailbox like confetti from hell. Each one more absurd than the last. Doormat extends 2 inches over property line. Mailbox flag shows weather fading. Workshop emitting excessive sawdust odor during quiet hours. Every citation carried a $150 fine plus $50 administrative processing fee, because apparently harassing homeowners comes with a convenience charge that would make a parking meter blush. The woman was trying to bury me in paperwork and fees, death by 1,000 paper cuts, but she made one crucial mistake. She was documenting her own harassment campaign in writing. Each violation notice was dated, signed, and filed with the HOA office, creating a beautiful paper trail of systematic abuse that any prosecutor would frame and hang on their wall. That's when things got personal and scary. 3 days later, I came home from a supply run to find my workshop had been broken into. Nothing stolen, but my tools were rearranged, sawdust scattered across the floor like someone had kicked over every container, and my current project, a custom rocking horse for the Children's Hospital fundraiser, was knocked over and deliberately scratched. The lingering smell of cigarette smoke mixed with the scent of violated space, even though I don't smoke and keep the workshop sealed tighter than a pickle jar. My newly installed security cameras had captured 2 figures in dark clothes and baseball caps, faces obscured, moving through my workspace with the casual familiarity of people who'd been watching my routine for weeks. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m., and the next morning Brenda filed a noise complaint with the city about late-night disturbances from my workshop. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone had inside knowledge of my schedule and work habits. That afternoon, I made 2 important decisions that would change everything. First, I upgraded to a professional-grade security system with cloud backup and motion-activated lighting bright enough to land aircraft. Second, I started recording every conversation with HOA board members, which was perfectly legal since Arizona allows one-party consent recording. If Brenda wanted to play games, I'd make sure every move was documented for posterity and prosecutors. The community pressure was building like steam in a boiler ready to explode. Brenda organized a concerned neighbors meeting to discuss property value threats and non-conforming residents, code words that made my skin crawl. Anonymous flyers appeared on driveways overnight, cheap paper that dissolved in the morning dew, leaving ink stains like bruises on concrete. "Protect your investment," they read. Some residents put personal convenience over community standards. The subdivision was splitting down the middle faster than a rotten log. Some neighbors apologetically crossed the street when they saw me coming, while others like Mrs. Patterson made a point of waving enthusiastically and asking about Dad's health loud enough for Brenda to hear from 3 houses away. I was becoming the unwilling poster boy for either resistance or troublemaking, depending on which side you asked. But the real breakthrough came when my lawyer buddy Jake reviewed the HOA documents over beers at Murphy's Tavern. His face went pale as he flipped through the charter and bylaws, his beer growing warm and forgotten. "Marcus," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "this whole emergency powers thing, it's complete fiction. The original charter requires 75% homeowner approval for any structural modifications to common areas. Brenda's been operating with about as much legal authority as a mall security guard." Armed with Jake's legal bombshell, I decided to go on the offensive. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate about HOA financial irregularities, then submitted a public records request for all HOA financial statements and meeting minutes. Here's something most people don't know. HOAs might act like private clubs, but they're bound by public records laws when they handle homeowner money. They can't hide behind private organization claims when they're essentially operating as mini-governments with taxation powers. Brenda's response was swift and vicious. Within 48 hours, she called an emergency board meeting and declared Dad's garage apartment an illegal conversion that violated county zoning codes. The woman had weaponized my father's housing security, threatening to report him to code enforcement unless I paid the accumulated fines, now up to $3,400 and growing like interest on a payday loan. I had 10 days to comply or Dad would have to move out. The smell of bacon from Dad's morning routine drifted through the house as I read Brenda's ultimatum, and I watched him navigate his wheelchair across the wooden ramp I'd built with my own hands. Here was a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd served his country with honor, now being threatened with homelessness by a power-drunk insurance adjuster with delusions of grandeur. The sheer cruelty of using an elderly man's disability as leverage made my firefighter instincts kick in. When someone threatens the vulnerable, you don't negotiate, you neutralize the threat. That's when I made my biggest discovery yet. Deep diving through county records revealed that Brenda's emergency turnaround space was never approved by the fire department. In fact, I found a 2019 memo where the fire marshal specifically rejected a similar proposal for safety reasons. The current configuration actually blocked emergency access to 3 houses, including Mrs. Patterson's. Brenda had destroyed my driveway to create a fire hazard while claiming fire safety. The irony was thick enough to cut with an axe. My security cameras were working overtime, capturing Brenda and her husband conducting late-night inspections of targeted properties like urban coyotes marking territory. The audio quality was crystal clear when I recorded her coaching board members at Harold Finch's house. Keep finding them until they sell or comply. Make it more expensive to fight than to leave. The woman was running a systematic harassment campaign with the cold efficiency of a corporate downsizing. Financial analysis revealed Eagle Construction's billing patterns were more crooked than a mountain road. Identical work orders priced differently depending on the homeowner, phantom materials charges, labor hours that defied basic mathematics. They'd stolen approximately $200,000 over 18 months, using HOA authority as their personal ATM while driving out anyone who asked uncomfortable questions. I quietly shared my findings with sympathetic neighbors, discovering that 40% of households had received violations in the past year, a harassment rate that would make a prison warden proud. Several families revealed they'd considered selling just to escape the constant citations and fees. Mrs. Patterson's Bridge Club became my intelligence network, collecting stories of Brenda's abuse from across the subdivision. The woman had turned our peaceful neighborhood into East Germany with palm trees. But Brenda wasn't finished escalating. She filed a lawsuit against me for defiance of lawful HOA authority, seeking an immediate injunction to force compliance with all citations. Legal fees alone could bankrupt me even if I won, and she knew it. Simultaneously, she launched a media campaign painting me as a difficult resident who threatens community safety to anyone who'd listen. The courthouse steps felt cold under my feet as I read her filing, realizing she was betting everything on intimidating me into submission. That's when I hired a private investigator to research Brenda's background, and what we found was more disturbing than I'd imagined. This wasn't her first rodeo. She'd pulled identical scams in Minnesota and Wisconsin. The Minnesota Homeowner Association had filed complaints against her for harassment and financial impropriety before she mysteriously moved to Wisconsin. There, she'd lasted 18 months before the community voted her out after a corruption scandal involving kickbacks and forged signatures. The woman was a serial HOA predator, moving from state to state like a locust, setting up shop, stealing everything she could, then disappearing when the heat got too intense. Arizona was just her latest hunting ground, and Willowbrook Estates was her current victim. But here's what Brenda didn't understand about Arizona. We don't run from rattlesnakes, we grab a shovel and settle the problem permanently. As I sat in my workshop that evening, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and the weight of evidence, I realized this wasn't about driveways or property values anymore. This was about power, profit, and a predator who'd found the perfect system to exploit. Brenda and her husband had systematically used the HOA as their personal criminal enterprise while destroying families who got in their way. The Henderson family was collateral damage, my father was leverage, and I was the target who refused to break. But every predator eventually meets their match, and Brenda Kowalski was about to discover that some fires burn everything to the ground. The bombshell came from the most unexpected source, Jake's paralegal girlfriend who specialized in property law. While reviewing the original developer's deed restrictions, she found something that made her call Jake at midnight, and Jake called me at 12:15 a.m. with barely contained excitement. "Marcus, you need to sit down for this. The original property deed contains a restrictive covenant that prevents any alterations to existing infrastructure without unanimous homeowner consent. Not majority vote, not emergency powers, unanimous consent from every single property owner. The implications hit me like a freight train loaded with justice. Brenda's entire road construction project was illegal from day one, violating the foundational legal document that governed our community. Every jackhammer strike, every chunk of concrete removed, every dollar spent, all of it void and actionable. She hadn't just stolen my driveway, she'd committed criminal destruction of property while violating the very covenant that gave the HOA its authority. But the legal smoking gun was nothing compared to what my firefighter buddy's forensic accountant friend discovered in the HOA books. Mike had volunteered to take a look off the books as a favor, and what he found made Bernie Madoff look like a Sunday school treasurer. Eagle construction payments showed classic kickback schemes, invoices inflated by 300%, phantom work orders for services never performed, and cash payments with no corresponding completion certificates. $50,000 in emergency repairs existed only on paper. There were no work sites, no materials deliveries, no evidence the work ever happened. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone imagined. My private investigator's background check revealed Brenda's real motivation wasn't power. It was survival. She and Donald were leveraged to the breaking point with a second mortgage, maxed out credit cards, and 3 failed business ventures bleeding money. The HOA presidency was never about community service. It was about staying ahead of bankruptcy court. They'd used our neighborhood association as their personal financial life raft, while drowning everyone else. Then came the personal betrayal that nearly broke my faith in humanity. Security footage revealed that board member Sarah Chen had been conducting unauthorized property inspections, feeding information to Brenda about residents' schedules, vulnerabilities, and financial situations. Sarah's husband's landscaping business had received $30,000 in no-bid HOA contracts as payment for her spy services. The anonymous violation reports that seemed to know exactly when I'd be away from home were coming from someone with a key to HOA records and a complete lack of conscience. The real estate manipulation scheme made my stomach turn. County Planning Office records showed Brenda had been lobbying for zoning changes that would benefit a high-density housing development. Her ultimate goal was forcing out long-term residents to suppress property values, clearing the path for outside investors to buy low and develop high. My property was a key parcel in a larger scheme involving people with serious money and no morals. She wasn't just stealing from homeowners, she was engineering the destruction of our entire community for profit. But here's what really made my blood boil. Discovery of Brenda's detailed target list, complete with financial profiles, family vulnerabilities, and timelines for resolution. The Henderson family wasn't random victims. They were specifically chosen because Mr. Henderson had lost his job and they were behind on mortgage payments. Other families were targeted for divorce proceedings, medical debt, elderly relatives needing care. Brenda had turned personal tragedies into business opportunities with the cold calculation of a predator. As I sat surrounded by boxes of evidence, audio recordings, financial documents, legal proof, witness statements, the scope of her criminal enterprise became crystal clear. This wasn't David versus Goliath, it was citizens versus organized crime. Brenda's emergency powers were cover for systematic theft, her violations were extortion tools, and her HOA authority was a fraud from top to bottom. The woman had built a criminal empire disguised as suburban governance, and tomorrow, that empire was going to crumble. The war room was Mrs. Patterson's dining room, complete with floral wallpaper and the lingering scent of chamomile tea. But don't let the doilies fool you. We were planning the most sophisticated takedown operation Willowbrook Estates had ever seen. I'd assembled what we called the Willowbrook Five, families that Brenda had systematically targeted and who were finally ready to fight back with everything we had. Mrs. Patterson became our intelligence coordinator, and let me tell you, never underestimate a bridge club network in suburban America. These ladies had information pipelines that would make the CIA jealous, connecting households across 3 zip codes with the efficiency of a telephone switchboard. Dr. Yamada, the retired economics professor, handled legal research with academic precision that turned dusty statutes into weapons. Jim Sullivan, our neighborhood electrician, managed technical documentation and recording equipment like he was producing a documentary. Katie Brooks, a social media manager who'd moved in 6 months ago, coordinated our public awareness campaign with the strategic thinking of a political operative. Jake connected me with Rachel Martinez, an HOA specialist attorney who'd built her career destroying corrupt board members. Her 3-pronged attack strategy was beautiful in its simplicity. Criminal complaints for embezzlement, civil suits for damages, and state regulatory investigations for violations of fiduciary duty. HOA boards have the same legal obligations as corporate directors. she explained over coffee that tasted like victory. When they violate that trust, they're personally liable for every dollar stolen and every family harmed. We were also pursuing federal mail fraud charges since Brenda had sent falsified documents through the Postal Service. Apparently, the federal government takes a dim view of people who lie through the mail. Mike, our forensic accountant, created a financial audit that read like a masterclass in white-collar crime detection. He set up monitoring systems to catch future kickbacks in real time and discovered the Kowalskis were so financially desperate they'd started skimming from the HOA's insurance premiums. Bank records revealed they were 3 months behind on their mortgage and facing foreclosure. This entire criminal enterprise was their Hail Mary to avoid losing everything. Jim Sullivan's technical expertise turned our neighborhood into a surveillance network that would make security professionals weep with joy. Professional-grade audio equipment for recording HOA meetings, strategically placed cameras with cloud backup systems, and digital forensics work that recovered deleted emails from the HOA server. We even had GPS data showing Brenda's property surveillance routes, proving she'd been stalking residents like some suburban serial killer with a measuring tape addiction. Katie's media strategy was pure genius, targeting local news outlets with a David versus Goliath story that had clear villains, sympathetic victims, and mountains of evidence. She created the hashtag Willowbrook5, and within 48 hours had built broader community support from homeowners across the state who'd faced similar abuse. Local news loves stories where regular people fight back against corrupt authority figures, especially when you can prove the corruption with documents and recordings. Mrs. Patterson's Bridge Club network became our community organizing backbone, spreading information faster than gossip at a church potluck. We held secret meetings in the basement of St. Mary's Church to avoid HOA surveillance, and our door-to-door canvass revealed that 67% of the neighborhood had been negatively affected by Brenda's reign of terror. The petition drive for an emergency HOA board election gained 120 signatures in 3 days. People were angrier than hornets in a hardware store. Dr. Yamada filed complaints with every state agency that had jurisdiction over HOAs, creating a bureaucratic tsunami that would keep investigators busy for months. The Real Estate Commission opened files on board conflicts of interest, the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit started an investigation, and someone even tipped the IRS about potential tax fraud involving personal expenses run through HOA accounts. Our sting operation was worthy of a crime thriller. We set up controlled tests to catch Brenda retaliating against compliant homeowners, with me publicly announcing compliance with minor violations while secretly recording everything. Like clockwork, she escalated with new violations within hours, proving the harassment pattern was systematic rather than legitimate enforcement. The woman couldn't help herself. She was addicted to the power trip. The insurance discovery was our nuclear option. Brenda had canceled the HOA's liability insurance 6 months ago due to excessive claims, but continued collecting premiums from homeowners for coverage that didn't exist. Any damage from her illegal construction projects was now individual homeowners' personal liability, creating massive financial exposure that could bankrupt families who'd done nothing wrong. Our psychological warfare campaign was subtle but effective. Daily legal document deliveries kept Brenda in constant fear. Public records requests forced her to spend hours responding to government inquiries, and strategic information leaks about ongoing investigations created a pressure cooker atmosphere that was slowly driving her insane. We coordinated everything across a 30-day timeline: evidence gathering in week 1, legal filings in week 2, and public campaign in weeks 3 and 4. Each team member had specific responsibilities with backup plans if Brenda tried to escalate or flee. Brenda's panic was almost palpable when word of our investigation leaked through the neighborhood gossip network. Her emergency midnight board meeting was captured on audio surveillance we'd planted outside Harold Finch's house, and listening to her coach her husband was like eavesdropping on criminals planning their next heist. "Deny everything, blame Marcus for harassment, and start shredding the financial records," she whispered with the desperation of someone watching their house of cards collapse in slow motion. But destroying evidence wasn't going to help her. We'd already secured digital copies of everything through our public records requests and Jake's legal discovery process. The woman was operating on pure panic now, making mistakes faster than a drunk driver on black ice. Her retaliation came swift and personal. My workshop suffered a second break-in, but this time they weren't content with rearranging tools and scattering sawdust. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the night as they destroyed hand-carved toys I'd been making for the Children's Hospital charity fundraiser. Security footage clearly showed Brenda's husband Donald and another man I didn't recognize systematically destroying weeks of work, including a beautiful rocking horse that had taken me 40 hours to complete. The crash of that handcrafted piece hitting the concrete floor was like hearing my own child cry out in pain. Brenda's smear campaign escalated to levels that would make a political operative blush. Anonymous flyers appeared claiming I was a dangerous veteran with PTSD who kept weapons in my workshop and posed a threat to neighborhood children. She filed false reports with police about threatening behavior and my supposed weapons cache, using veteran stereotypes and mental health stigma as weapons against me. The woman had sunk to depths that would embarrass a bottom feeder, turning my military service and firefighting career into ammunition for her character assassination. The community split was becoming uglier than a custody battle. 3 board members quietly resigned rather than face potential criminal charges, leaving only Brenda and her husband with any official HOA authority. Without a quorum, every decision they made was legally invalid, but that didn't stop them from continuing their harassment campaign. Anonymous threats appeared in mailboxes throughout the neighborhood. Stop stirring up trouble or face the consequences. The woman was creating an atmosphere of fear that would make a mob boss proud. I maintained strategic patience despite every instinct screaming at me to confront her directly. Years of firefighting had taught me that rushing into danger without proper preparation gets people killed. So I documented every incident with timestamps, photographs, and witness statements while building my legal case methodically. Every threatening flyer, every false police report, every act of vandalism was another nail in her criminal coffin. The regulatory pressure was mounting like water behind a cracking dam. The State Real Estate Board opened a formal investigation that could suspend the HOA's corporate registration, effectively dissolving their authority to collect fees or enforce violations. The Attorney General's office requested all financial records going back 3 years, and county code enforcement began auditing every Eagle construction project for permit violations and safety compliance. Brenda's desperate alliance-building efforts were pathetic to watch. She tried recruiting new board members from outside the neighborhood, offering under-the-table payments for support votes and even contacting previous victims in Minnesota and Wisconsin, asking them to retract their complaints in exchange for cash payments. The woman was attempting witness tampering across state lines, adding federal crimes to her growing rap sheet with the casual stupidity of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions. The insurance revelation hit the neighborhood like a bombshell. Homeowners discovered their properties were uninsured due to Brenda's canceled policy, creating $180,000 in potential personal liability from her illegal construction project. Several families threatened immediate lawsuits if the situation wasn't resolved, and real estate sales in the neighborhood froze solid as title companies flagged the HOA issues. Property values were plummeting faster than Brenda's credibility. My pressure campaign was surgical in its precision. Daily legal document deliveries kept her in constant fear of process servers. Public records requests forced her to spend hours responding to government inquiries instead of harassing neighbors. And media attention brought reporters to the neighborhood regularly. The stress was showing. Neighbors reported seeing Brenda's lawn developing brown patches from neglect, her usually pristine appearance becoming disheveled, and her husband Donald looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. The breaking point was approaching faster than a house fire in dry timber. Eagle Construction stopped answering phone calls from the HOA, their bank accounts were frozen due to suspicious activity reports, and Donald suffered what witnesses described as a complete nervous breakdown in the grocery store parking lot. The pyramid of fraud was crumbling under its own weight, and Brenda was about to discover that when you build your empire on lies and theft, gravity becomes your worst enemy. But she wasn't finished yet. Cornered predators are the most dangerous, and Brenda Kowalski was about to make one final desperate move that would seal her fate forever. Brenda's nuclear option was so audacious it took my breath away. She attempted to sell the entire HOA management contract to an out-of-state company for $1, essentially transferring all legal liability to unsuspecting third parties who had no idea they were buying a criminal enterprise disguised as community management. The contract required homeowner approval, but she tried to circumvent that with forged proxy signatures, dozens of them, including signatures from people who'd moved away years ago and at least 3 from residents who were deceased. The forgery was amateur hour at best, but it triggered federal interest when those falsified documents went through the Postal Service. Mail fraud is a federal crime that the FBI takes seriously, and when the white-collar crime unit opened their preliminary inquiry, suddenly our little neighborhood dispute had alphabet soup agencies circling like sharks. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division joined the party when they discovered tax implications of unreported kickback income, transforming Brenda from small-time HOA tyrant into federal fugitive material. My public campaign had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. The local news story went viral on social media, reaching homeowners across the country who'd faced similar abuse from power-drunk HOA boards. National homeowner rights organizations offered support and expertise, while our legal defense fund received donations from strangers who understood the David versus Goliath dynamic. The smell of fresh printer ink filled Katie's home office as she churned out press releases and social media content that kept our story trending. Brenda's final gambit was straight out of a white-collar criminal's playbook. She filed for personal bankruptcy to shield assets from civil liability while simultaneously transferring property to relatives in obvious attempts to hide wealth from creditors. Donald filed for emergency separation and divorce, trying to distance himself from the sinking ship before it pulled him under completely. Watching these two rats abandon their shared criminal enterprise was like witnessing a masterclass in honor among thieves. There isn't any. That's when our insider finally broke. Sarah Chen, the board member who'd been feeding Brenda intelligence about residents, called me at 3 a.m. sobbing with guilt and terror. She revealed Brenda's expansion plan, forcing out 20 more families over the next year, targeting anyone with medical debt, job loss, or family crisis. The recordings Sarah provided included audio of Brenda discussing cleansing undesirable elements from the neighborhood with language that made my skin crawl. Apparently, Brenda's vision of community improvement involved ethnic and economic purification disguised as property standards enforcement. The community response was swift and decisive. Neighbors organized a legal defense fund that raised enough money to protect every affected family, volunteer security patrols prevented further property damage, and an emergency HOA meeting drew 90% attendance, the highest turnout in neighborhood history. The vote of no confidence passed 87-3 with only Brenda, Donald, and one terrified holdout supporting her continued leadership. The woman had managed to unite a fractured community against a common enemy with the efficiency of a foreign invasion. Government response escalated daily. The county suspended all HOA enforcement powers pending investigation. The state legislature announced emergency hearings on HOA reform legislation, and consumer protection agencies issued warnings to other communities about similar fraud schemes. Our case was becoming the poster child for systematic HOA abuse, driving policy changes that would protect homeowners statewide. Brenda's isolation was complete and pathetic to witness. Donald moved out and filed for divorce to protect remaining assets. Former board members publicly denounced her actions in newspaper interviews, and Eagle Construction declared bankruptcy to escape HOA contract obligations. Even her few remaining supporters quietly distanced themselves as the criminal evidence mounted. The woman who'd terrorized an entire neighborhood was now facing the consequences alone, abandoned by everyone who'd once enabled her reign of terror. The evidence against her had become overwhelming. My private investigator delivered a 400-page report documenting multi-state fraud patterns. Financial audits revealed $280,000 in misappropriated funds. Video evidence showed systematic harassment of multiple families, and witness statements from 45 neighbors documented years of abuse. We had enough evidence to prosecute her in 3 different states for a dozen different crimes. Law enforcement coordination was impressive to watch. Local police, state investigators, and federal agents were coordinating arrests across multiple jurisdictions, preparing simultaneous charges that would prevent her from escaping through legal technicalities. Asset freezes prevented further financial damage while investigators traced every stolen dollar back to its source. The national media attention was surreal. Major newspapers published investigative series on HOA abuse using our case as the centerpiece. Cable news picked up the story for human interest segments, and a congressional subcommittee on housing announced hearings on HOA reform that would reference the Willowbrook case in official proceedings. Our neighborhood dispute had become a symbol of broader problems with unchecked HOA authority. As I sat in my workshop that final evening, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and the weight of justice approaching, I realized we'd accomplished something bigger than personal vindication. We'd exposed a predator, protected a community, and sparked a movement that would help homeowners across the country. Tomorrow, Brenda Kowalski would face the consequences of her crimes in the most public way possible. The gymnasium at Jefferson Elementary was packed tighter than a sardine can, with over 300 residents from surrounding neighborhoods filling every folding chair and lining the walls 3 deep. The smell of floor wax mixed with nervous energy as local and national media crews set up equipment, their camera lights creating a circus atmosphere that buzzed with anticipation. Cable news trucks lined the parking lot like an invasion fleet, and the scraping sound of metal chairs on linoleum created a symphony of tension as people settled in for what everyone knew would be the trial of the decade. County Commissioner Sarah Walsh called the emergency town hall to order just as Brenda made her dramatic entrance. Gone was the confident neighborhood tyrant in khaki capri. This woman looked like she'd been chewed up and spit out by her own conscience. Flanked by two expensive attorneys in $1,000 suits, she wore an ill-fitting dark blazer that hung on her frame like borrowed clothes. The contrast with my entrance was stark. I walked in surrounded by Dad, Mrs. Patterson, and dozens of neighbors who'd become family through shared struggle, carrying boxes of evidence that would change everything. Commissioner Walsh wasted no time cutting to the heart of the matter. The Arizona Department of Real Estate has filed formal charges against Brenda Kowalski for embezzlement, fraud, harassment, and document forgery. The FBI has opened investigations into mail fraud and racketeering. The IRS is pursuing tax evasion charges. The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of camera equipment and Brenda's audible gasp of despair. Brenda attempted to maintain her innocence with the desperation of a drowning woman grasping at straws. "This is a witch hunt by disgruntled residents who refuse to follow reasonable community standards," she declared, her voice cracking with strain. But when I took the microphone, methodically presenting evidence on the large screen with visual aids that made complex fraud understandable, her defense crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. The first bombshell was audio of Brenda coaching her husband on fabricating invoices. "Make sure you bill at least double what the work actually costs. These idiots will never know the difference." The recording quality was crystal clear, her voice unmistakable, her criminal intent undeniable. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible even over the media equipment. Community testimony painted a picture of systematic abuse that would make a dictator proud. Mrs. Patterson described the harassment of my disabled veteran father with such dignity and passion that several reporters were visibly moved. Dr. Yamada explained the targeting of minority families with academic precision that left no doubt about the discriminatory nature of Brenda's enforcement. Jim Sullivan displayed before and after photos of property damage and falsified violations that had the crowd murmuring with outrage. Katie Brooks presented social media evidence of intimidation campaigns that showed premeditation and malice aforethought. That's when Brenda completely lost her composure and revealed her true nature to the world. She interrupted Dr. Yamada's testimony, screaming about ungrateful homeowners who don't deserve nice neighborhoods, and unleashing a torrent of racial and class-based slurs that were captured live on cable television. "These people should be thanking me for trying to maintain standards in a community they're dragging down," she shrieked, her mask of respectability finally slipping to reveal the ugly bigotry beneath. The legal bombshell came with perfect timing. Federal prosecutor Amanda Torres announced that criminal charges had been filed 1 hour earlier, simultaneous with FBI raids on Brenda's home, Eagle construction offices, and HOA storage facilities. Asset seizure orders had frozen all accounts pending restitution calculations, and evidence teams were already processing boxes of documents that would keep prosecutors busy for months. But my mic drop moment was the secret weapon I'd saved for last, a complete recording of Brenda's confession to the entire scheme, captured during a private conversation where she thought she was safe from surveillance. Her voice filled the gymnasium with damning clarity. "I had to break a few eggs to make this omelet. These people will thank me eventually when property values skyrocket after we clean out the undesirables." The media circus exploded in real time. Cable news conducted live satellite interviews while social media erupted with the hashtag #JusticeForWillowbrook. Local news crews captured neighbors' reactions for the evening broadcasts, and Brenda's racist rant became internet infamy within minutes of leaving her mouth. The community response was overwhelming. A standing ovation erupted when I finished presenting evidence. Spontaneous donations for our legal defense fund exceeded $50,000 before the meeting ended, and HOA abuse victims from across the country started contacting local media with their own horror stories. The ultimate humiliation came when FBI agents escorted Brenda from the building in handcuffs, her expensive attorneys trailing behind like pallbearers at her professional funeral. The perp walk was broadcast live on national television, the final image of a woman who terrorized families for profit facing the justice she'd spent years avoiding. Standing at that microphone, looking out at faces filled with hope and vindication, I realized we'd accomplished something bigger than personal victory. We'd proven that ordinary people can defeat corruption when they stand together, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated by bullies with badges and clipboards. Justice came swift and satisfying. Brenda received 5 years in federal prison plus full restitution to every family she'd harmed. Turns out judges take a dim view of people who steal from homeowners while targeting disabled veterans. Donald got 3 years for conspiracy and document fraud, with Eagle Construction's assets liquidated to pay victim compensation. Watching these two criminals led away in orange jumpsuits was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie, and twice as satisfying. My driveway was rebuilt with premium materials at the HOA's expense, better than the original with proper drainage and decorative borders that would make a resort jealous. Dad's accessible entrance was restored and improved with a wider ramp and non-slip surfaces, and the sound of his wheelchair rolling smoothly across new concrete was music to my ears. The workshop damage was covered by court-ordered restitution, plus enough extra to upgrade my equipment and expand the space for community programs. The neighborhood transformation was remarkable to witness. We elected a new HOA board democratically with term limits, transparency requirements, and financial oversight that would make a bank examiner proud. Property values recovered faster than a phoenix rising from ashes as the toxic HOA reputation faded, replaced by a community known for standing up to corruption and protecting each other. Our case sparked legislative change that rippled across the state. Brenda's law passed the Arizona legislature requiring independent oversight of HOA finances, homeowner Bill of Rights protections, and criminal penalties for board members who abuse their authority. National media attention led to federal hearings on HOA reform, with my testimony helping craft legislation that would protect homeowners from coast to coast. The financial recovery exceeded our wildest dreams. The restitution fund provided $180,000 to affected families. Our class action lawsuit against the HOA's insurance company succeeded beyond expectations, and property tax assessments were reduced due to documented harassment that had artificially suppressed values. Justice wasn't just served, it came with interest and penalties that made every victim whole again. But the most meaningful outcome was the Willowbrook Community Workshop I established in Brenda's former house, which sold at auction for a fraction of its value. The irony was perfect. The property she tried to control became the heart of community cooperation. We offer free woodworking classes for veterans and at-risk youth, funded by surplus from our legal settlement. Dad teaches wheelchair accessibility techniques to other contractors, turning his experience into help for families facing similar challenges. The scholarship fund we created provides trades education for kids who can't afford college, because sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the wreckage of someone else's cruelty. The smell of sawdust and fresh wood stain now fills the space where Brenda once plotted her schemes, and the sound of teenagers learning valuable skills has replaced her toxic complaints. My relationship with Dad deepened through our shared struggle against institutional bullying. Watching him testify with quiet dignity about his housing fears while maintaining his veteran's composure taught me more about courage than 20 years of firefighting. We spend more time together now, sharing morning coffee and planning workshop projects that benefit the community we fought to protect. The broader movement we sparked continues growing. Our case gets cited in congressional hearings, the documentary film rights sold with proceeds funding a victim advocacy organization, and I speak at homeowner conferences across the country. The Willowbrook story became a template for communities fighting similar corruption, proving that David can beat Goliath with preparation, documentation, and unified community support. Every year we celebrate Freedom from HOA Tyranny Day with a neighborhood barbecue, woodworking demonstrations, and veteran appreciation ceremony. Media coverage brings positive attention and tourists who want to see the community that fought back and won. What started as trauma transformed into annual tradition and source of pride that strengthens us as neighbors and friends. Our annual festival attracts visitors from surrounding states who want to learn how we defeated corruption and rebuilt stronger than before. The event has become a symbol of hope for communities facing similar abuse, showing that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about HOA law or fighting corruption. It was about community. When neighbors stand together, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated, there's no force on earth that can break that bond. Now it's your turn. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments below. Every story matters. Every voice counts. Subscribe for more tales of justice prevailing over corruption. Because somewhere out there, another Brenda is terrorizing another neighborhood, and they need to know they're not alone in the fight.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.